They say revenge is best served cold, but in Sophie Cunningham's case, it came live, raw, and broadcast to millions of screens. On the surface, it looked like a simple feud, a fiery guard clapping back at a loudmouth pundit. But the truth? That was just the beginning. Sophie wasn't just defending herself. She was sending a warning, a signal that the cracks in the WNBA, long ignored, were about to be exposed. And the real question isn't what she did to Skip Bayless. It's what she's planning next. Skip Bayless, the so-called titan of hot take television, went on his show like he always does, tossing out lazy jabs at athletes for clicks. This time, his target was Sophie Cunningham. He called her a clout chaser, riding her teammate Caitlin Clark's popularity. For Skip, it was just business as usual. Stir the headlines, grab the clicks, and move on. But he underestimated Sophie. She didn't fire back with anger or insults. She went sharper, cooler. On her podcast, she exposed the hypocrisy in one line. Skip, who's really chasing clout here? You're using my name to get clicks. And the kicker? The video Skip posted had 36 views. Not 36,000, 36. Sophie turned the narrative upside down. He needed her more than she needed him. That first clash wasn't just a comeback. It was a public execution, but the feud with Skip was only the spark. The real fire started on the court. Lexi Hall, Sophie's teammate, endured 2 brutal head injuries in days. The second, after the whistle, was allegedly from an unnecessary swing by Kayla McBride. 1 injury could be chalked up to bad luck, but 2? This was different. Violence on display, and yet the referees did nothing but hand out a technical. No flagrant, no ejection, just a slap on the wrist. Sophie saw it for what it was, a system failing its players. She felt the betrayal deeply because the league, the very system supposed to protect athletes, looked the other way. And the pattern didn't stop there. Kelsey Mitchell, an unstoppable guard, was treated like she didn't matter. Night after night, she dominated, yet when she was manhandled in front of referees, no calls came. The silence was deafening. Sophie questioned, why is this happening? Favoritism? A hidden blacklist? A quiet agenda deciding who gets protected and who gets ignored. The evidence was piling up, and Sophie wasn't going to stay silent. When Sophie spoke out, the league retaliated. First, a $500 fine for a TikTok criticizing officiating. Then $1,500 for comments on her podcast. Then an undisclosed fine during another game. The message was clear, stop talking. But Sophie didn't cave. Each fine wasn't a threat, it was proof. Every dollar taken only strengthened her case. The league thought money could silence her. Instead, it became fuel. Her defiance was unmistakable. Fine me again. Suspend me if you have to. I'm not backing down. Sophie's fight was no longer personal. It had grown into something systemic. The league's hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. They claimed to value player safety, yet Lexi Hall was left with black eyes from a blatant elbow. They celebrated stars but ignored Kelsey Mitchell's dominance. They preached empowerment but punished the player brave enough to speak. Each contradiction reinforced Sophie's case. Every fine, every ignored foul, every selective whistle became evidence. And here's where Sophie's true power emerged. She doesn't play by the league's rules. She doesn't care about fines, reputations, or popularity. She only cares about fairness. Her fearlessness is her superpower. While the league counts dollars, Sophie counts principles. While they try to silence her, she turns punishment into proof. Every action taken against her strengthens her message. The system is broken, and she won't be quiet. Skip Bayless. He was the warm-up. One man with a microphone. Easy to defeat. The WNBA? That's the real opponent. The stakes are higher. Careers, reputations, player safety, and the very soul of the league. Every attempt to control Sophie through fines, threats, or media pressure backfires. Her voice grows louder. Her rebellion becomes visible. Other players are watching. Some agree silently. Others feel the same frustration but haven't spoken out yet. The question now isn't whether Sophie will fight. She already has. The question is whether her fight sparks something bigger, a movement, a revolution that forces the WNBA to face its own reflection. Sophie Cunningham isn't chasing clout. She's chasing fairness, and in a system that has shown her nothing but double standards, that pursuit looks a lot like war. The takedown of Skip Bayless was never the story. That was the prologue, the spark. Now her battle has shifted from one man to an entire institution. Every ignored foul, every selective whistle, every fine only fuels her case. She has drawn a line in the sand. The war isn't coming. It has already started, and the final question remains. When one player is fearless enough to risk her career, her money, and her reputation, what happens when others decide to follow? Will Sophie Cunningham remain a one-woman army, or are we witnessing the first shot in a revolution that could change the WNBA forever? Because here's the truth. Sophie isn't fighting for headlines. She's fighting for principle. And in sports, principles have a way of catching fire. The impact of Sophie's defiance began to echo. The WNBA realized that punishing one player wasn't enough. Her message was growing louder by the day, spreading among fans, teammates, and even rivals. Players who once stayed silent began whispering about injustices, double standards, and blatant favoritism. And the league? They tried to contain the fire with empty statements, carefully worded interviews, and more fines. But every action only drew more attention to Sophie. The fear they hoped to inspire started to backfire. Sophie wasn't afraid, and that was beginning to unnerve the very system that believed it could control everything with money and rules. The domino effect had begun. Teammates and league stars started noticing that Sophie didn't just speak, she acted. She showed that being silenced wasn't inevitable, that resistance was possible. Some players began questioning arbitrary referee calls. Others started using their platforms to share similar experiences. What started as a personal defense became something larger, a seed of revolution, a chance for structural change in the league. The question lingered. How many more would have the courage to stand up, knowing Sophie was leading by example? As the spotlight intensified on Sophie, the WNBA's decisions began to look increasingly desperate. Larger fines, media pressure, behind-the-scenes meetings, all signs that they knew a simple reprimand wouldn't solve anything. But Sophie was already thinking ahead. She knew the next phase of her battle wouldn't just be verbal. It would be strategic. Every podcast episode, every statement, every breakdown of injustice became a piece on the chessboard, setting the stage for a much bigger confrontation. A confrontation that could redefine power in the league and change forever how players are treated and heard. Sophie knew this wasn't just about fines or media attention anymore. The stakes had grown. Careers, reputations, and the league's credibility were all on the line. Every move the WNBA made in response to her defiance only highlighted the cracks in the system. Players were watching closely, and the fans were noticing too. Sophie's actions were no longer just a personal fight. They were a mirror showing the league's deepest flaws. The question wasn't whether she would keep going. The real question was how far the league would push before realizing they couldn't silence her. Every fine, every reprimand, every attempt to pressure her only made Sophie stronger. Instead of retreating, she turned every attack into evidence. Proof that the league's priorities were skewed. Money wasn't her concern. Principle was. Each podcast, each social media post, each public comment became another strike against the hypocrisy she was exposing. Fans began to rally behind her, teammates started to see her as a voice they could trust, and the narrative shifted. Sophie wasn't just surviving the system, she was weaponizing it. The spark Sophie ignited began to spread. Other players, quietly frustrated for years, were now starting to question the same double standards she had exposed. The conversation wasn't just about missed calls or selective protection anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and the very soul of the league. Sophie's battle was evolving into something bigger than herself. She was no longer just a single voice speaking out. She was becoming the catalyst for a potential player-led movement, and the league knew it. The more they tried to contain her, the more visible her influence became. The league could sense it. The longer Sophie refused to back down, the more impossible it became to control the narrative. Fans, players, and even commentators were starting to question the WNBA's decisions, refereeing, and priorities. Sophie's defiance had turned from a personal stand into a spotlight that exposed systemic issues. Every ignored foul, every missed call, every fine now worked against the league, building momentum for a tipping point. The question looming over everyone wasn't if Sophie would keep fighting, it was what would happen when her movement could no longer be ignored. A revolution in the league wasn't a threat anymore. It was becoming inevitable. The WNBA was no longer just dealing with one outspoken player. They were facing a symbol of resistance. Every decision, every attempt to quiet Sophie only amplified her message. Executives were watching nervously as social media buzzed. Fans debated calls and teammates whispered in locker rooms. Sophie had become more than a player. She was a mirror reflecting the league's failures, and the more they tried to suppress her, the clearer it became that control was slipping through their fingers. The stage was set for a confrontation that could redefine the balance of power, and no one in the league could predict just how far Sophie would go. What started as a single act of defiance had grown into something much bigger. Sophie's voice was no longer just her own. It was becoming a beacon for players who had felt silenced for years. Every fan, every teammate, every critic watching could see that she wasn't afraid of consequences. The fines, the threats, the selective calls, they all highlighted the problems she was exposing. And in doing so, Sophie showed that speaking the truth, even in the face of an institution determined to punish dissent, could spark change. The league wasn't just facing a rebellious player anymore. They were facing the possibility of a movement they hadn't anticipated.